And I think oftentimes in the profession of sales, people might go, they are an expert in what they know about the product that they're representing. But until you can be an expert in the value of that product to the work that your customers are responsible for doing, then most times it doesn't actually matter. Customer doesn't want to be an expert. They don't want you to make them an expert in your product. They want you to add value to the job that they have to do. And the people that figure that out are the top 20% in the profession. And I've met, from my 40 years in tech, I've met a lot of world-class technology leaders.
Welcome to Corporate Competitor, presented by Forbes Books, the podcast where executives share how the lessons they learned playing sports shaped their leadership. With me for today's episode is my good friend, Anthony Robbins, the recently retired Vice President of Federal at Nvidia, and a seasoned leader with a career spanning some of the most iconic organizations in corporate America, including AT&T and Oracle. At Nvidia, Anthony oversaw the company's federal initiatives, ensuring that AI and high-performance computing solutions met the complex needs of the government, the federal government, and the defense sectors. Notably, Nvidia was recently ranked number one on Forbes magazine's list of America's best companies, recognized for excellence across more than 60 measures, including financial performance and customer and employee satisfaction. Anthony played basketball on a full scholarship at Jacksonville State University in Alabama, and I'm excited to learn how he applies lessons from the court in the work that he was able to do over an extraordinary career in the world of technology. Now make sure to check out corporatecompetitorpodcast.com/notes for my favorite quotes and reflection questions to help you apply today's insights. Anthony, thanks for joining us.
Don, are you kidding me? I've been waiting for like a decade to be on a program like this with you.
You're so funny. You are, in fact, one that has been on our target and list for a long time because, A, you are the complete embodiment of everything we talk about here. Your background in sports, we're going to get to. What you've achieved in business is over the top. I want to open up by talking about the company that everybody's talking about, right? It's logoed on your shirt there, Nvidia. The whole world has been amazed by what the company has done these last few years. But in 2017, there you were, highly respected leader at one of the greatest blue bloods in all of corporate America, AT&T. You had hundreds of people and billions in revenue assigned to you. And you get this call and you make a bold decision to join Nvidia, a company that, many people was widely known just as a gaming company, right? I mean, they made gaming. What did you see? And because what you walked into was small, right? I think you had 6 employees when you first, like 31 million in revenue when you first joined Nvidia in your space. What was it that allowed you to thoughtfully take that risk? What did you hear? What did you process?
Well, that's a really good question. And your comments about my role at AT&T, I was running the global defense business at AT&T and just, had a giant organization and, a lot of people and it was a really good company. I knew people there and I kind of followed the company a little bit, but I read a ton. And with every article that I read, every blog that I read, every video that I watched, I learned more and more and more, and I just thought that if any one of these technologies that were under development by Nvidia, if any one of them actually took hold in the marketplace, it would be huge. And I thought about it first from a government perspective. Could the government use this technology? Because that was the market that I had, been in my whole career,
and that you were going to be responsible for.
Yeah. And so I convinced myself through, hours of reading that if one of those things happened, it would be gigantic.
Was one of those things AI?
Oh yeah, for sure. 100%. I mean, that was the that was the fascinating technology that attracted me to the
But
opportunity.
this is in 2017, so it's
Yeah,
before. I mean, I know AI
yeah,
has been around forever. Everybody loves to
yeah,
talk about it, right? We all say hello Siri and whatever, and
yeah. That's it.
but the truth is, AI as it was envisioned by Nvidia had not been available to the world.
That's right. It was emerging, right? And
Right.
so technically speaking, if you go back and you read the history of the development of artificial intelligence, you'll find a big event happened in 2012, right? And so that was 5 years before I started at Nvidia, and so I read a lot about kind of what they did, what happened in 2012, and I tried to understand how might that relate to the Nvidia of the future and Nvidia of the future in the government marketplace. And I think Don, when I started, Nvidia was about a $9 billion company, and when I retired, the year the year prior, their fiscal year prior, they were $130 billion. It
It's all
was
because of you.
No, it is not. Had nothing to do with me. But let's be clear. Jensen Huang cast an amazing leadership role over this company and the world. And I know we'll talk about Jensen some more, but I sincerely hope that the world gets to know this leader. I mean, he's just incredible. And what he's done at
Well,
NVIDIA is incredible.
so introduce us. I mean, again, all of us have read stories about Jensen. He shows up in his black leather jacket. He's got
Yeah.
that. There's a little bit of a cool factor to him. He doesn't see around corners. He sees around city blocks.
Yeah.
As a leader.
Yeah.
Um, Talk to me. What made him such a great? Tell me a story of Jensen Huang and his leadership that has resonated with you when you saw that you realized, whoa.
Yeah, well, there's a bunch of them, and I'll try to rattle off a couple of them. And some of them are smaller, and some of them are principled in thinking. So I remember when I started at Nvidia, in the federal marketplace, they make great use of these things called challenge coins, and
Yep,
these challenge coins are and you, Don, I'm sure you have many of them. Probably
I
General
do.
Banks gave you a challenge coin,
I've got a bunch.
and maybe George Bush gave you a challenge coin, right? And so and these coins are exchanged when somebody makes a material contribution to something, whether it's, and a lot of times it's contribution to mission. um, and so when I started, I said we have to have an Nvidia challenge coin that we can use in our marketplace. And they said to me, and I was a vice president when I started. I was vice president of the government business, and it's a challenge coin. I thought I had ability to just create that. And they go, well, you're gonna have to get Jensen's approval. And I said, like, you guys are kidding me, aren't you? And no, you're Jensen. I said, you mean Jensen, the founder of our company, the CEO of our company, the leader who's managing a $10 billion company is going to have to approve my challenge coin. And they go, oh yeah. And so, and I said, okay, well, who gets this approval? And they said, well, Anthony, you have to get the approval. And I didn't know Jensen. Like I was brand new. And so I sent Jensen an email. I said, Jensen, we'd like to have a challenge coin. And then he responds with how we should design it. Like he responds with how we should design it. And so the creative team in NVIDIA, who's world class, created, a mock-up of a challenge coin. And they came back to me and I said, okay, it looks good. Let's go produce it. And they go, well, you have to get Jensen's approval to produce it. And so I said, well, who does that? Well, you do, Anthony. And so I sent it to Jensen and I started getting back these emails with challenge coins and pictures of challenge coins in Jensen's hands, front and back. And Jensen would say, he would point to each one saying this or that, more ornate, bigger, smaller, more. And, this went on, and we created the first ever NVIDIA challenge coin. And listen, I mean, Jensen created it as he was the founder of the company that was more than 20 years old and $10 billion in business. And that sent a huge message to me that this leader pays attention to all the details of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants excellence in every product or service that's related to the company that he has imagined. And so even like our corporate, we call it, at NVIDIA, we called it a corporate brochure, which is our it's our slide deck that tells the story of the company.
Right.
It is like a masterpiece of art. And then Jensen's keynotes, and Don, you've been there
I've
live,
been there. Yep.
um, he's a masterful storyteller, and I also, like a story of org charts, for example. Jensen believes the mission is the boss. And so when I started at AT&T, and I said, hey, or before I started, I said, could you send me the org chart? They sent me a package of 65 slides. My org chart at AT&T was on 65 slides. When I left Nvidia after more than 7.5 years there, I never had an org chart. Jensen didn't believe that there was power in organizations. He believed there was power in people, and he wanted a flat organization that learned quickly, that adjusted as appropriate to his theme of the mission is the boss. And then he also he was he was as kind and generous as he was relentless and intense. And so I think I've shared with you, I led the Toys for Tots
Mm.
program inside of Nvidia for years. He responded to every email I ever sent. I couldn't send a lot of them to the organization. He responded to everyone. He was the most gracious donor to that program. And, in over 3 years, we raised, something like $800,000 in cash.
Mm.
And so when we went through COVID, he was kind, gracious, and generous to our contract workers, just as he was employees. He accelerated, wage increases and stock distributions. And I mean, this, there's only one leader like this. I've met, from my 40 years in tech, I've met a lot of world-class technology leaders. There is only one of Jensen. It was just an absolute honor to work for him.
There are a couple other things. I love your the line, the mission is the boss,
Yeah.
right? And that idea of a reasonably flat organization that allows you to move people quickly, right? If an opportunity presents itself, hey, what talent do we need there? As opposed to saying, oh, you're over here in this,
Yeah.
and if I lose you to someone else, I have less influence because I have one fewer head count, right?
Yeah, exactly. That just doesn't show up at Nvidia. And he always used to say, "We're not building the next any company. We're building the first Nvidia."
Wow. So a couple of other things that I know I've heard you say about him that just because again, I'm looking these leadership lessons. That's what our listeners are looking for. What can we learn from a guy like Jensen? One of the things that he says is that we do big things. Like I love that concept, right? That we do big things is uh, it permeates, right? When you make that a phrase that is what it says is some people might have reduced us to a gaming company at the beginning, which I did, frankly, when you first told me about them.
Yeah.
But their vision has shifted to a place over the years where they really do see themselves as the place to do big things. How does that affect when you say when a leader says words like that? How does that affect the team?
Well, whew, there's a lot there. There's a lot of companies that talk about that they have technology that can change the world and make the
Right.
world a better place. A lot of companies, everyone's favorite marketing program or slogan. This was my time at Nvidia. Was the first time I ever worked for a company or a leader where I thought that was actually possible. Like
Mm.
that is how Jensen thinks. I am no longer an employee of Nvidia. I am a shareholder.
You can say anything you want to say.
Yeah, I'm no
Awesome.
longer in a but I think it's the most consequential technology company in history. That's what I think Nvidia is. And then Jensen, Jensen has the pressure of what is he doing for the street in that 30, 60, 90 day, every quarter window. And I think he does a great job addressing the analysts and the shareholders and the like. But what he is phenomenal at is 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 seeing where there are opportunities or imagining there are opportunities, creating a small team to go after really big opportunities and giving that team time and freedom.
Mm.
And, because if you just take the work that Jensen and team is doing in whether it's healthcare or autonomous systems, he's been working in those areas diligently for, a decade or more, right? And there's a lot of people and publicly traded companies that go in and out of those projects really quickly. Jensen's ability to stay true to what he thinks is going to be big it's amazing. And yet at the same time, he's intellectually he's brutally honest. Like if he or we have made a mistake, he wants us to quickly admit it, to more quickly learn from it,
Yeah, he
and
has that phrase,
and
"Failure
adjust.
must be shared," right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
How does
Yeah.
that play out for y'all?
Well, and sometimes in uncomfortable manners, right? So we might be in a leadership team meeting, and he might address a failure of a particular team, and he usually doesn't, say it's this leader blew it. It's we as a company put effort into this team to go do something and it didn't work out, and what did we learn and how might we adjust, and so he does that in a manner that's consistent with general communications. It's very open,
Mhm.
right? And
Was there ever one of those moments where you got, where you suddenly found yourself
oh
on the back
yeah,
end of a
oh yeah.
conversation?
No, nobody, no. Listen, if he prides himself and the culture that he's building as being intellectually honest, that all of us are subject to his critique, his compassion for the people in the company, his compassion for the company that he has inspired, right? And his belief in what we as a company might do for the world that we live in, that dominates as what as a leader, he's not his leadership style that isn't dominated by trying to belittle somebody. It is always about the bigger picture, taking, really big risks, attracting great talent,
Hmm.
allowing them to do their life's work in their lifetime. It was just an amazing place to work, and he's an incredible leader. I mean, just
Well,
incredible.
you took that gamble in 2017,
Yeah,
a little $9 billion company,
yeah,
and I would say it was a gamble that worked. It was a risk
yeah,
that was worth it.
yeah. It was fascinating. It was,
Forget the money, what you
yeah,
experienced, and you got to bring your career into that spot as you said, very, very cool.
yeah,
I do want to ask, you had you gave me the opportunity to be a keynote speaker. You opened the door for me to become a keynote speaker at a couple of Nvidia events over the last couple of years. And what struck me is there are these people in the room and they're making buckets of cash, right? They're making money hand over fist. They're uber successful, and yet they work unbelievably hard and with incredible dedication. Um, Sometimes when people, Nick Saban used to say, it's hard to, it's hard to feed the well, it's hard to feed the well-fed, right? I mean, the fact that when people are and convince them that they're still hungry, and how does that environment keep the well-fed hungry?
well, that's I don't know. I don't know if you can answer it in just a sentence, but I do have a couple of r- you know of really clear thoughts on it. So one is Jensen sets an incredible standard. You mentioned Saban. Saban set an incredible standard at University of Alabama, and Jensen sets the bar exceptionally high, and he's uncompromising in his craftsmanship and the subject matter expertise that he's building in his role. And there's not a single employee. I know. I think today Nvidia might be around 30,000 employees. There's not one that works harder than Jensen today. And think about it, right? He was the founder of this company, and today, 30 years later, he's still the hardest working employee in the company. So he sets an incredible bar. The second thing is his depth and breadth of knowledge is unlike it is unlike anything I have ever seen in my life in
Mm.
anywhere. I mean, I have seen him have detailed discussions with PhDs in our research and development group to, you know, heads of government agencies to, you know, commercial concerns and higher education. I mean, his the level and depth and breadth of his expertise is awe-inspiring, and I think, it sets this big example. I mean, Jensen often talks about hiring really smart, really talented people, and I mentioned earlier, but, people that wanna do their he wants to create this environment where people this purposeful environment where you wanna do your life's work in your lifetime. And and so if you're hiring really smart, really talented people and you're giving them a canvas and an environment to do their life's work, that then you have created, I kind of, and this is just from one person's perspective, you've created this purpose, in culture that's really unique, that's
Because it's
really
individual. It's
it's
for
yeah,
every one of those people.
yeah, it's really unique. It's really hard to create. It's hard to keep alive, but somehow he has managed to do all of that because the way he talks, as I just recently left to us as an organization, it has changed as we've become bigger, but the same purposeful message about, always learning, creating this environment, hiring talented and smart people. He was talking about that, when I joined the company and of course much before.
Research shows that 80% of us believe we have a book within us, but the number of people who follow through and do the work to create that book is far, far less. The reason is that the process can seem so overwhelming. And that is why I have partnered with Forbes Books to make the process easier for those of you who listen to this podcast and believe you have a story in you. So if you're ready to turn your leadership experience into your legacy, start your journey with us today at Forbes Books. Visit forbesbooks.com/Don to get started. All right, I want to get to our mutual love of sports. I mean,
I knew we
look,
would get here.
I think we could talk about Jensen Huang all day long
We
because
could.
this man is so fascinating, and what happened at Nvidia is so incredible. But we got to talk basketball, right? You love the game growing up. Obviously, you're a big guy, and you earned a scholarship to Jacksonville State in Alabama, the Fighting Anthony Robbins. That's what my kids call Jacksonville State. Can you share a memory, maybe a game, maybe even a practice where you learned a lesson that you continued to apply, maybe something a coach said to you, something in a relationship with a teammate that you continued to apply over the years?
Yeah, yeah. So I at Jacksonville State University, I played for the best basketball coach that I've ever played for, and Coach Bill Jones. And and I remember the time that was just this hugely impressionable. So when I was recruited to Jacksonville State, I remember as a recruit visiting, and I felt like this winning culture. Like
Mhm.
when I was there, when I was on campus, it was like they were expecting to win the conference next year. They were a nationally ranked team the previous year, and I mean, there was this culture that just permeated the environment you were in. So that was one thing. And so during my junior year, a game against our number one rival, we had just cracked I think we were number 15 in the nation, so we were ranked nationally in Division Two. There's 4,000 people in our gym this particular night. As I said, we just kind of became nationally ranked. I think we were 6-0 in the conference, 15-3 overall. We were down by 7 points. We were down by 7 points with 42 seconds left in the game. We were down, and there was no 3-point shot back
Right,
then. We were down
right.
by 7 points, 42 seconds left in the game, and we ended up winning that game. And now we did win it in overtime, but we won it. Um, and it was a big rivalry, a full gym, and um, and I just, I remember still today standing on the floor looking at the clock, and I was thinking, man, how is this going to work out? And I just and I had doubts, but it was also, it's the best basketball coach I ever played for, and it was the best team I ever played on.
But so you
And
had doubts, but how did
yeah,
the coach allay those doubts? How did
well,
he get you to believe that what did he say to you
well, yeah.
in
So
that
Coach
moment?
Jones always said, like, when we were really good, like my junior year, we got ranked as high as sixth in the nation. We finished the season 22-8. We went to the NCAA tournament. He always used to just talk about the next game. He didn't talk about the whole conference. He just talked about the next game. And then when you were in the game, he talked about the next play, right? And so he was meticulous. And so if it was if we're going down an offense, he was calling the right play, and we trusted him. We had a lot of confidence in him. If we were going back on defense, he was pushing us for that next stop. And so it was always like, so in that particular moment, it was just the next possession of the ball. And
Right.
whether it was you were on
So you're
defense or
not
whether
thinking
you on
about
offense.
7 down. You're not looking at a 42-second
No,
clock. You're thinking
about the next
immediately.
bucket.
Right.
Right, the next bucket. And he was just an extraordinary coach, and he was composed under pressure and in the moment. And like you felt like, I still remember when we tied the game and went into overtime, and we led all of overtime except for a brief period. And when we won, of course, there was a gigantic smile on Coach's face, but it wasn't like he was surprised. It was like he had this confidence. He was great at his craft, but he had this confidence that we could win the game. And so as players, we thought it was going to be a tough one, but we also thought we could win the game. And it's all the things that lead to that last 42 seconds where he prepared us meticulously. We practiced really hard. He recruited talented players. And if you weren't coachable, you didn't last under his program, because he was going to recruit you if you were talented, but you weren't going to stay around if you weren't talented and coachable. And
Mm.
so and so all this preparation and planning that went into how he ran his program prepared us for that 42 seconds. And we were ecstatic, of course, that we won. But I still remember. I remember these two moments. I remember looking at the clock, thinking, "Man, how are we going to do this?" And I remember Coach Jones at the end of the game being really happy, but nothing surprised about his reaction.
You know, how have you used that over the course of an incredible career, leading other people? How have you used that next play strategy?
Well, and so
How did that play for you?
yeah, yeah. So it's like, in sales, if you just apply it to, for the vast majority of my career, I've been in sales, and you lose deals, and so I always used to say, you can lose a deal, but you don't have to lose the customer, right? So we could this year we could lose a deal to a customer who could still be a great customer next year, or we could all of a sudden have been in a great position in a deal, and find ourselves, maybe not the preferred supplier or the preferred product. And but like there was this tenaciousness and belief. I go, just keep fighting for the deal. Like, if you're focused on doing good for your customer, then stay with it.
Mm.
And it was just, and I have always believed that, like, the sale is never over till you get the order, and the deal is never won, until you've delivered the product. And even, and sometimes it's okay to finish in second place. Sometimes sometimes you don't win every game. Sometimes you don't win every deal, but you could still have a good season, and you could still have a good career. And some people, will burn bridge. If they lose, if a customer makes a decision that's not them, they get all angry or agitated at the customer or the situation, or they might want to change companies, or they might want to change roles. Um, but but I just, over time and from the things I learned really in sports, it just, I felt like I had developed a capacity to hang in there, whether it was great times or really tough times. And really good work and satisfying, challenging work can happen in really tough times.
Powerful line there. You don't
Yeah.
win every game, but you could still have a great season. You could still have a
Yeah.
great career.
Yeah.
And so if you overreact to a singular moment, you could cost yourself those last two things, a good
I
season
could,
or a good
yeah.
career.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I think it's
You
really
know,
well said.
I was at a retirement event for you, had a chance to speak to one of your high school teammates. And he mentioned that as a big guy, your offensive opportunities depended on someone else passing you the ball. And but he admitted that there were times when he was just enjoying shooting so much that he didn't do much of that. And in order for you to do well, you had to go collect whatever rebounds were left when he missed shots. What did it teach you to the fact that you needed other people to feed you, if you will, in order to be able to be successful?
So what was interesting to me when I thought about that is, it wasn't about getting it into me and letting me try to be as good a player as I could be to or to help the team win. It was kind of what everybody on the team had to do, what everybody on the team had to do to play their role and to prepare themselves to win. And on a basketball floor, you cannot win with 5 people, and you can't even win with 12 people on the roster. It takes everybody, the managers and the coaches and the program and the like. So, is it very very early on, you kind of realize what a fantastic team sport is. And basketball for me was always a metaphor for either how I led in the technology business I was in, or leading and coaching teams to me felt very similar to leading and coaching teams in tech. And you had to have shared goals, and you had to communicate, and you had to work as a team, and you had to be an expert at your position, and you had to work hard, and you couldn't make excuses. All of these things that I felt like I learned from Coach Jones or from playing basketball translated really well. They just translated really well into the work environment. And in fact, when I at the event you attended, when I was thinking through my remarks, I kind of felt like my background in sports and then my mom had more to do with the building of a foundation of whatever success I might have enjoyed than maybe any other like single area. In over 42 years, that's a pretty interesting. I think it's a pretty interesting statement. So sports was a big deal to me.
Your mom, um, I mean, recently passed, and but I know how influential she was in your life. Tell us what you learned at home that you were able to continue to use in your really successful career.
Yeah, I'd say there's kind of 3 things. I've thought long and hard about this, as you know, and I've spoken about it. So, my mom was a single mom growing up in a really tough environment in the 60s and 70s, really tough for women in the workforce. And, and but she never made excuses. Like,
Mhm.
she never made excuses. And I don't feel like I literally I don't know if I've ever made an excuse in my life. You know, I just and so from her I just adopted this attitude of not making excuses. And you've heard me say, go home and look at your paycheck, and how much money do you make by making excuses? You just don't get paid for that attitude and that behavior. And so that second thing was her work ethic. You've heard the story where she graduated from college at the same month I graduated from high school. So she was going to school full time. She had 3 kids. She was working full time. She came to all my games, and so she worked really hard. And up until the time in which I retired, that was the one thing I did consistently. And over time, is I just worked hard. And I've developed some confidence, either in myself or my teams or people I work with over time. So,
Well, I love it, and I think it's important. Sometimes we get so caught up in our careers and everything else, we forget the foundation.
yeah.
And for you, without question, she was that. You've had an incredible career in sales. I mean, like during the intro, I marked off several of the companies you worked for and the unbelievable roles you've had. Was there ever a secret weapon for success for you that allowed you to stand out from competitors? Was there something that you think you did maybe a little bit different or better that might have had impact?
People cut corners on practice,
Mm,
and people will cut corners on preparation. And that is another thing that you will never do in a Jensen Huang inspired company or meeting or review is, Jensen was meticulous on in his preparation and on the practice field. He was meticulous. If I say, okay, a lot of people kind of work hard, but the preparation or the practice for the game, for the meeting, for the sales call, for the event, for the speaking thing, like that stuff, I think that matters a lot. And frankly, I think people today in an environment where we're agitated by social media, or we're moving really fast, or we're generally distracted. I don't think people prepare or practice quite like I feel it is important to do that.
How are some ways you, as a professional, so move yourself out of sports, practice?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things, and so if you're in sales, it's not as much about what you know about your selling profession or what you know about your product. It's how much you know about how it fits with the work that your customer is trying to do.
Right. Right.
And I often refer to that as subject matter expertise.
Right.
And never more important than it is today, because today in sales, we generally have the most educated customer that we've ever had, in the history of the profession of selling. So customers are really educated, and but they're not always educated on the value of the product that you might be representing, and specifically how it adds value to the work they are responsible for doing. And I think oftentimes in the profession of sales, people people might go, they are an expert in what they know about the product that they're representing. But until you can be an expert in the value of that product to the work that your customers are responsible for doing, then most times it doesn't actually matter, right? Because the customer doesn't want to be an expert. They don't want you to make them an expert in your product. They want you to add value to the job that they have to do, whether it's an agency or a commercial concern or whatever it is. And the people that figure that out are the top 20% in the profession.
So
Like
it's
they're the
not
top 20.
walking in and saying, "Oh, I'm a subject matter expert because I know what
Yeah.
this widget does," right?
Yeah. Yeah.
What you're saying is that the real expertise is in knowing how that will make their job easier. And in
That's
order
right.
to do that, you have to have done an unbelievable amount of preparation to understand what it is they're trying to do.
Absolutely. And so then if I go to preparation and planning, and so just like you practice to get ready for a game, or you practice in the summer to get ready for preseason at school, and your preseason prepares you for the season. And so just like you would do that in sports, you have to do that at work. And a lot of people will prepare themselves to know the company that they work for and the products that they have, but
And
that's
that's where
one
they
step.
stop.
It's short. That's they stop, and if they'll go the next step to practice and prepare themselves for what that means to the job of the customer, then I think that's where excellence occurs. That's
Mm.
that's where you find the top 20 people, and it is a beautiful thing. So when you see somebody like Michael Jordan play the game of basketball, he doesn't just show up at the games, right? And so when you see a professional account exec, salesperson, sales executive who can take a customer through, trends that are driving technology, and then how that relates to the business that they were in, and then create the conversation that says, here's the value that this will create for the job you're responsible for. It is absolutely beautiful thing. And so just like winning that basketball game, when you're down by 7 points with 42 seconds left in the game, the thrill of doing that kind of work separates you from just playing the game.
From everybody else.
Winning the
Right.
game in that moment and experiencing that thrill is, I think, why the good ones do this work at this level.
In fact, I had the amazing opportunity to be part of a really cool day in your professional life recently. You were recognized by the Institute for Excellence in Sales with a Lifetime Achievement Award. But what stood out to me was your acceptance speech. You didn't just name people you actually who had been important. You actually shared what each of those people taught you. And I love that because we talk a lot about mentoring, finding mentors, identifying people that could pour into your life. And you made it clear that those folks played an enormous part in your success. Now, for listeners who might be afraid to ask for a mentor, tell me, give me some guidance. What advice would you give them?
I don't know. I don't think it's very complicated. For me, most of the mentors that I had in my life were just showed up informally as friends first, and through that friendship, it evolved to say, okay, like we or they could, we could help each other, or they could help me in a certain area. And my very first mentor, I met playing basketball on a basketball court in Maryland, a game I still love today. We became friends first, and he was the one that opened the door for me to get into technology. And I had just a wonderful career in technology, and it started from just by meeting a guy that I became friends with on a basketball court. And then in contrast, I will tell you that when I was at Sun Microsystems, I ran the federal business there. They had this really formal mentoring program. I mean, you go online, and I think we filled out 20-page questionnaires that described me and described the mentor, the mentee mentor relationship, and went through all this analysis and tried to pair you with people that could most help you, and it was a good program. And I participated in that. We ran right through the whole course of the program, and I got value from it. But I would say for me, the mentorships that I have had that have been the most meaningful have just begun with some level of friendship, and we just decided that we could help each other. That's the so there's no magic in that.
No, but what I think I hear you say when we're talking about the Sun Microsystem, example, is that is a lot of companies have mentoring programs, right?
Right.
They have programs, um, but really, what you want is a mentoring culture. You want a
Yeah.
culture where people are unafraid to ask questions. That asking questions and learning from somebody is not seen as a negative. Um, how do you create that kind of culture? And you progressed from that early basketball court relationship into many leadership roles. And I know that people that have worked for you have often thought of you as a mentor. How do you create that relationship where the door is open, there's no judgment in questions asked?
Yeah.
What are some of the things that you've done that allow people to kind of gain that level of comfort?
It's okay for people on your team to go develop themselves and expertise that they want to develop by going and speaking with other people in the community or other coaches or your peers in a company. Like, it's okay for somebody on my team to go to one of my peers at Nvidia, let's say, and get better coaching and mentoring than what I might be able to give them at that time.
Mm.
Right. And so I think sometimes there's like a maturity level that a leader has to gain to be open to his or her organization gaining expertise from other than that leader.
Anthony Robbins, for 15 years, you have inspired me. For 15 years, you've just been a great friend and someone to whom I could turn and ask questions and learn. And today, I got to share you with many thousands of people because you decided to be a corporate competitor with us today. And I can't be more grateful.
Well, Don, I listen, I appreciate your kind words. I think the world of you. Yeah, I've read many of your books. I've been in audience many times when you have spoken, including, your Hall of Fame induction, which was incredible. And so I've just learned a ton from you. And as I shared at the event you attended with me recently, including the art of being a friend. So I appreciate you.
Well, I hope you could feel through the questions, the answers, the fun together, the passion I have for Anthony Robbins. What an incredible man, and he has been a great gift in my life. And so I hope he was for you today. But there were several takeaways for me. I love the discussion right at the very beginning about the importance of mentors in his life, right? And mentors being in most of those cases they begin as friendships, right? Where but he would realize in that friendship there was something they could teach him, something he might even be able to teach them. And so looking at mentorship as a relationship, not as part of a program, right? He talked about that program at Sun that had, all the boxes you had to check and everything else you had to do. It wasn't the program that really helped. It was the opportunity to develop relationships. So finding mentors and maybe finding them right in the heart of relationships you might already have, super important. My next great takeaway was as Anthony discussed the stories of two incredible leaders who played outsized roles in his life, his career, his success. The first was his college basketball coach, Bill Jones, right? Bill, he told a great story, Anthony did, about being playing against their rival. They're ranked in the top 15 in the country, and they're at home. The gym is filled, but he looked up and was only 42 seconds left. The team was down by 7. Now, in that moment, you can become overwhelmed. 7 points, 42 seconds. What are the odds? All of that would be stacked against you. But instead, Coach Jones made the point to the players, this is about the next play, not about you. You're not going to make up 7 points in a single shot. So just do right in the next play. And they did. They tied the game, went into overtime, won the game. But the idea there was it was about next. And even for all that moment of celebration and excitement, the coach's he immediately turned to the next game because that's what had to happen. But the second piece that he talked about was how Coach Jones shared with him a little bit about how to lose, right? They didn't lose a lot, but when you did lose, you had to you have to put that in perspective. You have to not make excuses for it. I loved Anthony's line, you can lose a game, but you don't have to lose the season. You don't have to lose a career, right? If you lose a game or if you lose a sale, it all of that happens. And I love this next line about customers. We said you can lose the deal, but don't lose the customer. So impactful, so valuable, and really great conversation. The next great conversation was around Jensen Huang, right? The founder of Nvidia, extraordinary leader. That whole idea about the challenge coin, think about it, right? He's running a $9 billion company, and he's actually designing with Anthony the challenge coin that he would give out to people for service of the federal efforts at that company. Um, you could argue that was maybe you almost might call it micromanagement to some people. Oh, wow, why you should be a $9 billion leader, not a challenge coin leader. But as Anthony pointed out, it made a real great impression on him that every detail matters, that excellence wins, and that if we're going to do it, we're going to do it to the place of excellence. And then Jensen went on to teach him later the importance of setting standards as a leader, right? No one outworks Jensen Huang in that company. No one can challenge him on depth and breadth of knowledge. And while he's constantly a student of his business, his people, and even those things that he can turn around and help others with, allowed Anthony to completely. You can tell the reverence he has for Jensen. Now, I have to tell you, I'm a better leader today because I had this conversation. I hope you are as well. Now remember to subscribe to our Corporate Competitor podcast on YouTube. It's a new opportunity for us to grow another line of conversation and to share these exact interviews in video as well as audio. It's an exciting new venture for us. Join us on that journey. I need to say it again. I said it to Anthony, and I say it every week. I appreciate you.